Suppressing negative thoughts may be good for our mental health after all. To help unpack that, we're going to access this article, link in the description. I won't go over every part of the article. I encourage you to read it. And I will also put a link to the paper that this article is referring to. So, from the article, the commonly held belief that attempting to suppress negative thoughts is bad for our mental health could be wrong, a new study from scientists at Cambridge University suggests. Researchers at the Medical Research Council Cognition and Brain Sciences Unit trained 120 volunteers worldwide to suppress thoughts about negative events that worried them, and found that not only did these become less vivid, but that the participants' mental health also improved. So it's as if there's some kind of global effect that happened here, which is doubly interesting. We're all familiar with the Freudian idea that if we suppress our feelings or thoughts, then these thoughts remain in our unconscious, influencing our behaviour and well-being perniciously, said Professor Michael Anderson. Not everyone is familiar with Freud, but he is a bit of a meme, shall we describe it that way, and certainly didn't get everything right, but was a pioneer. The whole point of psychotherapy is to dredge up these thoughts so no one can deal with them and rob them of their power. In more recent years, we've been told that suppressing thoughts is intrinsically ineffective and that it actually causes people to think the thought more. It's like the classic idea of don't think about a pink elephant. Oh, yeah. True, I think, the anecdote, don't think about a black cat and so on, to a degree. But to say that the whole point of psychotherapy, not every psychotherapy school or approach does that. And indeed, you may be one of those people who has thought over the years, dredging up stuff, to use the word that is there, or the phrase, then is that a good idea? Doesn't that mean you might ruminate more? Might these thoughts make you more anxious? Could it not actually invoke, trigger, or deepen depression? And some people have indeed said exactly that over the years. But certainly at the moment, I suppose the majority of psychotherapists would talk about talking things through, pulling up memories, etc. It's not to say there's no use with that and that it cannot have positive results, of course, but one size doesn't fit all. When COVID-19 appeared in 2020, like many researchers, Professor Anderson wanted to see how his own research could be used to help people through the pandemic. How public-spirited. His interest lay in a brain mechanism known as inhibitory control, the ability to override our reflexive responses, and how it might be applied to memory retrieval, and in particular to stopping the retrieval of negative thoughts when confronted with potent reminders of them. Very interesting area. And as we'll see, that appears to have been the genesis of the report, the paper that we're talking about now. Dr. Zulkada Mamet, at the time a PhD student in Professor Anderson's lab and at Trinity College, Cambridge, believed that inhibitory control was critical in overcoming trauma and experiences occurring to herself and many others she has encountered in life. She wanted to investigate whether this was an innate ability or something that was learnt, and hence could be taught. Good thinking, if it's learnt, could be taught. And also, I think it's important to focus in on that overcoming trauma and experiences occurring to herself and many others she had encountered, this inhibitory control. You may have found this yourself. You may have found that it's more beneficial to inhibit things. I certainly have experienced that, and I know quite a few people that I've talked to have as well. Dr. Mamet said, because of the pandemic, we were seeing a need in the community to help people cope with surging anxiety. Absolutely true. I think I was on local radio at one point talking about that, and surging is a good word to use. There was already a mental health crisis, a hidden epidemic of mental health problems, and this was getting worse. Absolutely. Lockdown after lockdown. So with that backdrop, we decided to see if we could help people cope better. Again, What a lovely approach. Professor Anderson and Dr. Mamet recruited 120 people across 16 countries to test whether it might in fact be possible and beneficial for people to practice suppressing their fearful thoughts. Their findings are published today in Science Advances. So this article is from September 2023, less than a year ago at the time of recording this video. In the study, each participant was asked to think of a number of scenarios that might plausibly occur in their lives over the next 2 years. That's important to make it as real as possible. 20 negative fears and worries that they were afraid might happen, 20 positive hopes and dreams, and 36 routine and mundane neutral events. The fears had to be worries of current concern to them that have repeatedly intruded in their thoughts. Again, this, of course, is important because, as I've said already, this makes it more real. So they've already had these intrusive thoughts about these things. So this is not something that's made up, just handed to them on a bit of paper, a scenario that someone else has typed out. This is real to them, or potentially real to them. Each event had to be specific to them and something they had vividly imagined occurring. Again, that's important. They had vividly imagined it. For each scenario, they were to provide a cue word, an obvious reminder that could be used to evoke the event during training, and a key detail, a single word expressing a central event detail. So, for example, negative. Visiting one's parents at the hospital as a result of COVID-19 with the cue hospital and the detail breathing. You can imagine that would be extremely negative for someone, particularly amidst the scare and fear that the pandemic and lockdowns caused. Neutral, a visit to the opticians with the cue optician and the detail Cambridge. Particularly neutral, I would imagine, if the visit was one that was a normal checkup. Positive, seeing one's sister get married with the cue wedding and the detailed dress. So you get the idea. Then, over Zoom, Dr. Mamet took each participant through the 20-minute training, which involved 12 no imagine and 12 imagine repetitions for events each day for 3 days. And we'll see what imagine and no imagine meant. For no imagine trials, participants were given one of their cue words, asked to first acknowledge the event in the mind, then, while continuing to stare directly at the reminder cue, they were asked to stop thinking about the event. They should not try to imagine the event itself or use diversionary thoughts to distract themselves, but rather should try to block any images or thoughts that the reminder might evoke. That's very interesting. So it wasn't distraction. Definitely not imagine it. It was block images and thoughts. For this part of the trial, one group of participants was given their negative events to suppress and the other given the neutral ones. So the suppression here was about a negative event and a neutral one. What about the positive? Well, we'll see. For imagine trials, participants were given a cue word and asked to imagine the event as vividly as possible, thinking what it would be like and imagining how they would feel at the event. For ethical reasons, no participant was given a negative event to imagine, but only positive or neutral ones. And you can see why, because imagining that negative event, well, that's kind of dredging it up, isn't it? Potentially. Dr. Mamet said it was very clear that these events that participants practiced suppressing were less vivid, less emotionally anxiety-inducing than the other events. So the ones that they practiced suppressing, less than the other events. Participants improved in terms of their mental health, but we saw the biggest effect among those participants who were given practice at suppressing fearful rather than neutral thoughts. Again, I think that's important. Following training, both immediately and after 3 months, participants reported that suppressed events were less vivid and less fearful. So that's 3 months. That's a good length of time. They also found themselves thinking about these events less. So when they did think about them, they were less vivid and less fearful. But they also thought about them less. That's a win, I think, don't you? Suppressing thoughts even improved mental health amongst participants with likely, as suspected, post-traumatic stress disorder. Among participants with post-traumatic stress who suppressed negative thoughts, their negative mental health indices scores fell on average by 16% compared to a 5% fall for similar participants suppressing neutral events. So there is a fall for the neutral ones of 5%, but that's a whacking difference, 16%. And whereas positive mental health indices scores increased by almost 10% compared to a 1% fall in the second group. In general, people with worse mental health symptoms at the outset of the study improved more after suppression training, but only if they suppressed their fears. So, in general, people with worse mental health symptoms at the outset of the study improved more after suppression training, but only if they suppressed their fears. So something about fear here, which is important. This finding directly contradicts the notion that suppression is a maladaptive coping process. I never thought that it was, at least not always. Suppressing negative thoughts did not lead to a rebound where a participant recalled these events more vividly. Only one person out of 120 showed higher detail recall for suppressed items post-training, and just 6 of the 61 participants that suppressed fears reported increased vividness for no-imagine items post-training. But this was in line with the baseline rate of vividness increases that occurred for events that were not suppressed at all. Again, it's a small study, but within this small study, these figures are really impressive. What we found runs counter to the accepted narrative, said Professor Anderson. Although more work will be needed to confirm the findings, it seems like it is possible and could even be potentially beneficial to actively suppress our fearful thoughts. Although participants were not asked to continue practicing the technique, many of them chose to do so spontaneously. Again, that's also interesting. That doesn't always happen in research. When Dr. Mamet contacted the participants after 3 months, she found that the benefits in terms of reduced levels of depression and negative emotions continued for all participants, but were most pronounced among those participants who continued to use the technique in their daily lives. The follow-up was my favourite time of my entire PhD because every day was just joyful, she said. I didn't have a single participant who told me, "Oh, I feel bad," or "This was useless." I didn't prompt them or ask them, "Did you find this helpful?" They were just automatically telling me how helpful they found it. That's so encouraging, and it is joyful itself to read that. Don't you think? I mean, this is absolutely fascinating, in my opinion. It is a counter-narrative. It is different from many people thought, many people preached. And once more, I'm not saying that those other approaches don't have their place. Of course they do. But maybe we've not been seeing the wood for the trees. Maybe there's been too much dogma around. And again, I just intuitively over the years have really wondered about the whole dredging up process, as I've said, and other people have as well. So if that's you, or if you've ever wondered about it, this research, small scale as it is, does seem to contradict or at least provide a counter narrative, a counter approach, a different approach, an approach which, if they hadn't gone ahead and done it, probably wouldn't have been done because so many people said, well, no, the approach these days is that we just don't do that. It is so harmful. But they went and did it. And it looks like At least as far as this study was concerned, they were right. What do you think?